Hi, this is Michael Waitze, and welcome back to ATP. APIs are the connective tissue of every modern digital ecosystem, but as they power innovation, they are also exposing organizations to new AI-fueled vulnerabilities. How should companies rethink their security strategies as attacks grow more targeted and more automated? Why are authentication and authorization flaws still so common in 2025? Are they really? And can AI help identify rogue APIs before attackers do? We are joined today by Reuben, Director of Security Technology and Strategy at Akamai Technologies, to break down the most urgent threats facing API-first businesses and what can be done about this. Reuben, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for doing this today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking me, Michael. Very excited to be here.
I'm super glad you're here. Okay, let's get right into this. With APIs sitting at the intersection of innovation and vulnerability, as I discussed in the intro, how should organizations rethink their security strategy to stay ahead of increasingly sophisticated AI-powered threats?
So I think the first thing that organizations need to understand is the growing prominence of APIs being part of their overall critical application service. Because in traditional days, when monolithic applications get exposed and people started to connect and work with it, protecting those applications was not rocket science because they're big, they're bulky, and you probably need a firewall for every one of them. But APIs are a little bit, or they are designed to be a little bit different. They are smaller, they are faster, and they move a heck lot of data in less time than monolithic applications. And because of that, understanding the type of data that's being moved back and forth between APIs is going to be very, very important for organizations. Unfortunately, not everyone knows exactly what's going on with their APIs. That is part of the challenge of modern application development, I guess.
Do you think most people even understand how much interaction they have with APIs on a day-to-day basis? Do you know what I mean? Because it feels like it's everywhere if you know that it's there. But if you don't know, it's kind of hidden from most people's day-to-day interaction with all of their software, yeah?
Yeah, so I've spoken to people and some of them say they know. Some of them guess they know. Some of them just outright say, I have no idea. And we actually did a survey on this one. So at Akamai, we actually talked to over 1,000 organizations across the world. And less than a third actually came back and said, I know how many APIs I've got. I know what data is flowing through those APIs. I know exactly what we should be doing. And that's a concerning thing because of the things I mentioned earlier, right? All the data, is it financial information? Is it credit card numbers? What is being moved between those APIs? More than 2/3 of the organizations don't know.
That's insane. One in two. That's just insane. So, what kind of insights, what have been the most valuable insights you have gained as a firm, right? Combining No-Name's API data with Akamai's broader threat intelligence?
Yeah, we actually saw a lot of very interesting things once we started to acclimatize no-name technology into Akamai's mature technology. So the first one was with regards to the type of API abuses that is going on out there. And API abuses are not attacks per se. So, when we think of attacks, we think of exploits, injections, DDoS, and so on and so forth. API abuse is really just abusing APIs to do things that they were not designed for. And No Name actually gave us that visibility in terms of the sheer amount of abuse that's going on in the industry right now. And that's very, very concerning.
Can you talk a little bit to me about just the scope and the size of the amount of data, just to give people a sense of it, that goes through Akamai Technologies platform? Right? Because I think people forget sometimes exactly what is happening here.
Yeah, so we estimate about a third of the daily internet traffic actually goes through Akamai, and a big portion of those traffic is actually generated from API. So, I think in 2024, we actually saw for the first time that there were actually more API generated traffic than human generated traffic. So what that means is that, more APIs out there, they're handling more data, they're automating more stuff, and basically generating a bulk load of data that's going back and forth across the internet. And that is not the most interesting part or the most concerning part. I guess the most concerning part is that out of those traffic, we saw an increase of, I'm very bad with math, probably 70%, more than 70% of those traffic were actually attacks on APIs. And that's a big thing, because the bad guys knows there's a whole lot of more APIs out there. They are vulnerable. They are very enticing, very valuable targets. Let's target those instead of, big applications that's being highly protected by lots of security. And let's just go after the lowest hanging fruits.
Why are these APIs such valuable targets for people that are trying to hack into them? Like, what is it that they're trying to get? Is it financial data? Is it personal data? Like, why are these such great targets?
So I'll address the first one in terms of what are they trying to get. And because of the dynamic nature of APIs, it could be handling different types of data at different points in time. Because in healthcare, you're looking at electronic medical records that's being transmitted from clinics to hospitals to health regulation bodies and stuff like that. And in banks, you're going to get transactions and financial information move back and forth between banks and fintechs and insurance companies and so on and so forth. So the value of data is there, right? But I think the most important thing that organizations need to understand is back in the good old days where we've got those big monolithic applications, we expose the whole entire applications and we try to protect it with everything we have, right? Firewalls and IDSs, IPSs, so on and so forth. Imagine APIs as, you've got this big building, which is your application. You've got this huge gate at the front, which is probably your web application firewall, for example, and everything needs to go through that, right? Every traffic, every person, every access needs to go through that little gate. APIs came into the picture when I don't want them to go through the gate because it's too slow, right? I need to open up a side door that goes directly to the HR department or that goes directly to the financial department just to, do what they're designed to do. We don't need to open up the whole building. We just need to expose this little function of that application. And that's where all the problems begin. Because as you expose more and more functions, you're going to get more and more APIs. And as you get more of those, you're going to start to lose visibility. And then you suddenly realize that I've got this sprawl of APIs across my estate that I probably don't have any idea of where they are, what they do, and probably how to secure them. That I think it's a growing concern across multiple organizations.
So one of the things that I remember when I was working at Goldman Sachs, right, is that we had all these big applications, and while the trading desk itself may have been pretty stable because it was a really good job to have, and on the back end, the people that were supporting those applications, sometimes they came and go, so the turnover was high. Do you think there's a real impact on, because you just said they may not even know like how many little APIs are out there. Do you think that turnover affects this as well, whereas like the guy or gal that's managing, let's say, these 10 APIs leaves and goes to join another company, and then those are just sitting there made more vulnerable by turnover? Is it something simple like that as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I've kind of seen two sides to that. The first one is exactly what we've mentioned in terms of turnover, people going and coming, and not doing a good job in terms of documenting those APIs and applying the relevant governance to those APIs. Those are still happening right now, because that's not a lot of organizations are mature enough to have that level of knowledge retention, even though the team turnovers. So that's a big thing. The other side of the house is really, nobody leaves, but because of, developers, they work on application or they develop applications based on projects, right? So they move from projects to projects. Once they're done with this project, they quickly move to the next one.
Yep.
And there will be times where they realize that, oh, I probably did not put in the relevant documentation, or I probably didn't update, right, people with what this API is supposed to do and describe it well enough, and very quickly move on to the next project. And when the organizations start to discover, hang on, there's 2 to 3 APIs that's out there. Where are the documentation? Don't know. Who was responsible for them? Don't know, because the team has moved on, right? And in the app development world, things move very, very quickly. They move like, deadline is a matter of weeks. And because of that, they lose sight of, accountability very quickly if this was even there in the first place. So I think the combination of these two actually play a major part in heightening the level of vulnerability in terms of exposed APIs.
So you mentioned this. I love this analogy you talked about with this big building with this like big gate, right? And in my mind, as you were talking about this, I kept thinking, yeah, but if the building's big, that means it has multiple floors, which also means it has windows everywhere, and these are just other places where people can go in. And I was thinking, if every one of those APIs needs to be like logged into in a way, that is a certain type of authentication, right? And then there's also authorization. Like, okay, I can authenticate myself, but am I authorized to go in? Are organizations still struggling with this too? Because this is like the most basic part of just exposing these APIs, right? It's just like, am I authorized to use this, and am I authenticated? Is this a problem?
Yeah, yes, it is. And the ironic part is that it's fundamental knowledge that authorization and authentication are going to be so critical and so basic, for secure APIs to be developed and to function. Yet the irony is that the top two most exploited vulnerabilities are authorization and authentication. So if we look at OWASP's top 10 everywhere, these are the top two that, even until today, people, I won't say people, but organizations are still struggling to, put a handle on it. And that is a very big thing, because there's a reason why these two are the most common and are the most fundamental, because they're not exactly hard to do, but the impact of these two are going to be huge if you don't do it. So to your point, this is something that is important and critical, but yet, we still see organizations struggling with it.
And why is it? Is it just that, look, the devs that I know, right, were always trying to solve gigantic problems, and they loved doing it. They looked at a problem as something exciting, right? And I remember actually talking to a guy once when I was working at one of these big banks, and I said to him, why don't you go out and start your own company? And he said to me, developers want to solve huge problems. And banks, big financial services companies have big problems that need technology to solve them. And I love doing that kind of work. But it almost sounds to me like this authentication and authorization stuff is just like a small little piece of it. And it's not the fun part. Is that also part of the reason why you think it's just not exciting?
It is not exciting. It is anything but exciting. It is part of security, and security, as you know, is not as sexy as developing cutting edge functions in apps, right? But at the same time, we've spoken to a fair bit of developers as well. And the thing is that they know it's fundamental, but they're being challenged by a couple of areas. The first area is the tools that they work with, right, are supposed to do this with them or for them, right? Automated and stuff like that. But because they're still leveraging legacy tools, that is maybe not applying the right test cases for the right environment, some of these just falls through the cracks. That's the first common thing we see. The second one is the sheer pressure of deadlines. Developing apps 10 years ago and developing apps today is completely different. Every agile sprint that they have, they're talking about deadlines. When is this going to be out? When are we doing regression testing? When are we hitting this functionality? When is the next milestone? I've almost never heard in terms of, have we baked in authentication? Have we ensured that there are no hard-coded keys? Have we done this, right, and that? It almost never happened, those kind of conversations. So I think one very interesting part is that when I spoke to two different developers, one guy was responsible for APIs, the other guy was responsible for client-side apps, things that run on your browser. The funniest thing was that the API guy was saying that, well, I will bake in everything, right? The validation is supposed to happen on your end, which is the browser, right? You're supposed to do the validation because it's, everything is generated and rendered on the browser. And the client end guy, the app developer, basically said, no, I'm not supposed to do that, right? I'm supposed to handle this part. This needs to be baked in during your app development cycles, not mine. So that's kind of disconnect in terms of how that is happening, because the net result was the API was returning excessive data. They don't bother to filter what data is it supposed to return. It's too much work and it slows them down. So they return the whole bulk of data, and the client side, which is a browser, is supposed to apply the validation and the filtering and return what is relevant to that request there and then. And when this happened, everything just broke down. They're returning everything. So the API side is returning everything. The client side is not validating. So basically they're just opening up the gates for everyone to come in and look at all the data that's not supposed to be returned. So these are the funny, well, I wouldn't say funny, but interesting observations we've seen when we speak to developers. There are, there's probably some confusion in terms of accountability and, where does the buck stops in terms of security. And I think that needs to be addressed very quickly.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about what it was like when I was sitting on the trading desk. Who was responsible for the API stuff that was going on? Because we did have tons of people using a fixed connection to us, which means that they had to get authenticated, they had to get authorized to come in to give us tons of data. But the fixed stuff that we did was had very specific data fields that were in there, and I don't think we were taking in excess information. Although, to be fair, we don't know what they were sending. All we knew we were using, right? So fair enough. And once we let them in, yeah, it's an interesting question that I hadn't thought about it that way. Talk to me about this too, though, right? These APIs are sitting out there and they're always on, right? You mentioned when we were talking offline, right, that the testing on these APIs is not happening on a day-to-day basis. And why is that? Like, why wouldn't they even run some automated tests on this or even do some manual testing on this? Why is testing on these APIs down so much?
So I won't say there's zero testing that's happening. It's just that probably not the right level of testing at the right juncture of that development cycle. So testing needs to be done at various junctures based on the functionality of that API that's being baked into it. So for example, I know a lot of API developers, they do testing, right? They run their DAS tools, their SAS tools, and whatsoever, but they do it based on checklists, right? So they test it based on this test case, that test case. And when I try to drill deeper, so where does this test case come from? Oh, it's from the app team. And suddenly it dawned on me, the app team is testing for security vulnerabilities based on the apps that's created by the app team.
Right.
That's strange because it's like the doer and the checker is the same person, right? So it's strange. Then I started to drill into, so where does the security guys fit into this? Oh, they don't. And that is weird because, when it comes down to vulnerability, risk, compliance, the security folks need to get involved. And, in such a situation, I started to realize that it's because the teams are too decentralized, right? And both teams are looking at different KPIs and whatever you call it, right? Metrics, as based on the performance and based on the accomplishments they need to do. And security is, they're probably looking at this bunch of KPIs. App teams are looking at this much of KPIs. Very little alignment between these two. So from a testing perspective, security team basically say, well, we need to get them to test these things, right? Because of XYZ requirements, GDPR or, PCI, so on and so forth. And the app team basically said, no, we're going to use our test cases because we've been using it all this while. And this is baked into our CI/CD pipeline. This is how we're going to do it. We don't want to use that way that you're telling us to do it because it's there's too much friction. It's going to slow the entire pipeline down. And we just don't have time for that. What is lacking, I feel, is the level of automation to make it less friction or more frictionless for the dev team, right? Second thing is get the visibility across to the security teams because they don't know what's going on right now. Make them aware that this is happening right now and, what are we expecting to see? And most importantly, the level of governance, of shared responsibility, of shared KPIs that align, to an API that is less vulnerable, less risky, and we know exactly how to fix it if things go sideways.
So it almost sounds to me like all of these big organizations are flying like a bunch of high-speed fighter jets, and now they're starting to get surrounded by like $1,500 drones, and they don't know what to do with them. And because the drones are so cheap to produce, and these fighter jets are so expensive to maintain, that while the jets are flying, the drones are around trying to attack them, and it's so much easier to attack something than fix it when it's flying at that speed. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean? Because these APIs are always out there. Some of these applications that they're connecting to are really monolithic and big, and yet the attackers can come from every direction at every side, and what they do, because it's automated, is really cheap. Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me, no?
Yeah, that's a great analogy of this whole thing because attacks are not unnecessary rocket science these days. So let me use DDoS as an example, right? Because not only do we need to protect APIs against exploits, we need to make sure that they're always available, right? And DDoS actually attempts to shut those down.
Before you do it, I want to hear this, but before you do that, just for people that don't know what DDoS is, can you just explain to them what it is? Just really quickly.
Do apologize. So DDoS means distributed denial of service attacks. So it's meant to overwhelm that particular service and make it unresponsive, basically taken offline, and you can't connect to that, right? So it's like me trying to order Grab, right? So in Asia we've got Grab, or in the US we've got Uber. So trying to order a car from Grab or Uber, and if the API that allows you to order that vehicle goes offline, you can't connect to it, you can't get your vehicle. So it's as simple as that. So when it comes down to modern day DDoS attacks, it is so simple to do it, right? And based on the analogy using fighter jets and drones, so the drones are cheap and they are like, I don't know if you've been to Japan. I know you've been to Japan, right? And you've seen those massive amounts of vending machines that's everywhere, right? You pop a few coins in, a few yen in, press a button, and you get whatever you wanted, right? It could be a can of drink, it could be a plushie toy, whatever. In the world of DDoS, it's happening where DDoS are now coin operated. If you want to launch a DDoS attack, right, you go to this interface, which is in the dark web, you pay amount of money, you state how long you need to use the service, you state the target, which is the hosting, right, like www.akamai.com, for example, you press a button, and the DDoS attack will then start to happen. And if you target it across, I'm going after all 200 APIs of this particular organization, I pay up the money, I press a button. So it has become so simple to get these attacks going, because it's like those $15 drones, well, probably more than that, right, $1,500 drones that's circling around those $1 million fighter jets that you're hiring people to maintain and protect. And it becomes a massive issue because you don't know where those attacks are going to come from, when they're going to come, and how are they going to attack you from time to time. So it's hard to predict that, right? So back to your point.
I was going to say, is there like an AI solution to this, right? Because if the DDoS attacks are automated and all these other hacker attacks are automated, is there a way to automate the protection with AI? And maybe there are like because there's this back and forth, right? There's this constant tug of war, right? Where the attackers are always coming at you, but the defense is always on as well. Is there an artificial intelligence way to say, like, we can be better at this than you can be at attacking us?
Yeah, so we're starting to see the industry moving a lot towards that. And I'll give you an example of what we're doing at Akamai. So at Akamai, we have basically enhanced our DDoS protection to include AI behavioral analysis. So what that means, right, in layman terms, is that it's able to adapt to the type of attacks that's happening. And even if the attack techniques are switching back and forth during the attack itself, the AI is able to recognize that and adapt the defenses accordingly. It's very different from your legacy DDoS protection, where it is static. It is based on patterns, right? Patterns means that, all right, I'm going to get 3 spikes in 60 seconds. That's a DDoS attack, and I need to stop that, right? So that's a pattern recognition in those legacy DDoS. The problem with AI-generated attacks is it doesn't follow a pattern. It does very randomized ways of trying to attack you. And the human brain is it's challenging for the human brain to comprehend. We recognize patterns. We can't predict randomization. It's hard. And that's when AI needs to come into the play, because one of AI's main strengths is to actually recognize randomization, because AI itself can be randomized if necessary. Which is why we're baked in that ability, or the AI ability, into modern day DDoS attacks, because it's become a necessity. It's no longer good to have. Because as these attacks, as you mentioned earlier, become more sophisticated, and as assets become more critical, as more APIs start to be out there, we need to bake this in from day one.
Okay. I'm going to make another analogy because I was watching fights over the weekend, right? I'm a UFC fan, so I was watching some fights over the weekend. And I think to be a great fighter, you have to be really smart, right? That doesn't mean you have to be super well educated, but you have to be really smart, because you're adjusting to a whole bunch of stuff in real time. And in the same way that the attack coming from this other guy is also coming from another team, right? Because that guy's got a corner team. He goes back after every round, sits down on a stool, and his guys tell him, stop doing the thing you've been doing because that's not working. Do a new thing. It's not randomization per se like it is in these DDoS attacks or in these hacker attacks, but it's still changing strategies in real time. And a great fighter's defensive team will then say, this guy's doing a whole bunch of stuff. It's not working at all, but he may change it up. And if he does, here's how you have to react to it. And then that fighters go back into the middle of the ring and start doing it. It sounds exactly like what you're talking about here. Yeah?
Yeah, it's absolutely similar because to win a fight in UFC and to be effective in launching a cyber attack, the element of unpredictability is going to be essential, right? Because if the opponent, or in this case, in security, if the defense is able to predict what you're going to do, you're right, they're going to stop you there and then. So to the attackers, the element of surprise and the element of unpredictability is going to be huge for them. And which is why they're harnessing AI to increase that to those levels for their benefit, for their advantage. Because to the human defender, I said that we recognize frameworks, we recognize patterns, we recognize what is good and bad. But if they attack in a new way that I've never seen this before in my life, right? What do I know? I know nothing. What do I do? Not sure. So that's going to create, some challenges for defenders, which is why more and more organizations are starting to bake in AI-powered security tools into the organization to recognize that this is something we don't know about. Let's harness the ability of AI to actually tell us something. Couple that with threat intelligence, couple that with attacks that AI have seen elsewhere, and try to make sense of things. So I think this is really where the industry is moving right now.
So the more I think about what Akamai Technologies does, right, and just the sheer, if I remember, I think you said 1/3 of all the internet data goes through some Akamai technology server or infrastructure, if I have that number right. How do you keep up with all this stuff? Because if all this data is going through it, a lot of them is coming through APIs. All this stuff that you're talking about is stuff that you guys have to deal with every single moment of every single day at all times and all over the world, right? And that's information coming from satellites, it's coming from routers, it's coming from everywhere, and you have all these touch points all over the world. Like how does that get managed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I usually tell people that it's magic. But
it is. It has to be though, Reuben.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think a big part of that is really because we didn't just do this overnight. So Akamai has built that global network you mentioned, and we're still building it, still optimizing it today for over 20 years. So for the past 2 decades, we have invested, we have experimented, we have optimized and calibrated to make sure that we are doing the things you mentioned earlier. Right, to be able to look at that amount of traffic, to be able to sustain and be resilient to handle that traffic on a daily basis is no easy feat. So what we're doing is really to use a bunch of really cutting edge technologies, I beg your pardon, internally at Akamai, including AI, machine learning, anomaly analysis and stuff like that. So all the cutting edge stuff. I'm not a data scientist, but this is what they tell me. Very, very cool stuff to analyze if I remember this correctly. So we're looking at more than 800 terabytes of attack data on every 24 hours. So every day is close to a petabyte of traffic that is attack traffic. And we're trying to use AI to make sense of it all, right? And how do the key question is, how do we decipher this and make our customers better protected, based on emerging threats, based on the stuff we're seeing out there on the internet? What do we need to do to secure our customers better? So to put it in layman terms, over 20 years of experience in building resilient networks and scalability, harnessing cutting edge AI and machine learning technologies to, look at all this enormous amount of stuff that's coming in. And most importantly, having very smart people that's actually looking at this stuff. So data scientists and security analysts and stuff like that, people that are way smarter than me, are looking at these things every single day and trying to make sense of it, right? And again, it all leads back to how do we protect our customers better and keep them online all the time. So that is really the objective of Akamai.
I mean, I've always thought that people take for granted this idea of like all this stuff that's happening in the background on the internet, right? They just log in every day, do their email, do some stuff on a browser, and forget about just like the sheer volume of information. If you're looking at 1 petabyte of data attacks every single day. It's just a gigantic amount of information. The teams that run this stuff must be, like you said, just building cutting edge technology because they have to, right? They're again the guys and gals that are protecting against these swarming drones while they're flying the plane. They're building the defense systems to do this. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about industry specific stuff, if you don't mind. How can because retail, e-commerce, right, is something that people do and think about every day, all day, right? How and it's emerged as a top attack target because there's money being transacted there, and bots are wreaking havoc on loyalty. Like even a loyalty program has value, right? It has balance sheet value. How can these retail platforms balance the user experience, right? Because one of the things you said was the APIs are there to facilitate little individual functions, so that you don't have to go through the gate. You can go through the window, right? But that makes the user experience better, but it also creates these vulnerabilities. How do these retail guys balance this stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. And retail is probably one of the most attacked by bots across the world, based on what we've been seeing for the past 5 years. And the reason for that is, again, like you mentioned, financial transactions, people buying stuff, credit card numbers flowing back and forth, and these are enticing targets for the attackers. But to really understand how do they protect better is a big part of their business are coming from consumers, right? People logging online and buying shoes and whatnot. And retailers, they would love to ensure that the experience for their consumers are 100%, always seamless, frictionless, personalized, enriching, and so on and so forth. So we've seen retailers also understand that, well, we need to make sure that the threats are contained and managed, right? So customers coming in, are they real humans or are they bots, right? Machines, basically. And a lot of them have to deal with bots that are doing scalping. For example, I'm launching limited edition Adidas shoes, for example, at 12 a.m. midnight. And all the bots are going to come in and just scrape everything you have, and not leave anything for actual human consumers. That's bad for the business because they're going to buy from you and resell it at 2,000% profit. So they need to understand that bots are going to come in, they're going to do stuff like that, and they're also going to masquerade as consumers and take over their accounts for fraud purposes and stuff like that. So I think a lot of retailers are considering, first of all, we need to ensure that the experience is still frictionless, right, for the user. Make it transparent, make it invisible, that the users don't even know security is there. But at the same time, applying the right level of protection for the business as well as for our customers. So one thing that I saw that was, well, now is kind of decreasing. One thing I saw that was pretty popular back then was something called capture. And capture is the very opposite of a frictionless experience.
It's horrible. No one likes it, right? Nobody likes it.
It's bad, right? I'm just going to be honest with you. I hate using it because I need to find where are the traffic lights, where is the bicycle.
Why? And also, I feel like I'm training your AI when I'm doing this, right? Like I know what's going on here too, right? It feels really unfrictionless. I know that's not a word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And to compound it further, a lot of people these days are buying stuff using a mobile device, right? That little 7-inch screen on the smartphone. Imagine doing capture on that.
Ugh, it's horrible. It's a horrible experience.
Correct. So that is why a lot of retailers are starting to rethink, well, I'm going to ditch capture. It's terrible, but we need something to replace it, which is why a lot of people are now starting to think, or organizations now starting to think, well, I need something transparent that's working in the background. I need something that is, offering me visibility in terms of how protection is going on or how is it happening? What are we stopping? How many have we stopped? And more importantly, give that frictionless experience back to the user. So at Akamai, we've developed that with our bot management, with our account takeover protection and stuff like that. But I think what is the most interesting part is something that we call the penalty box. So the penalty box is if we are suspicious that you might be a bot, right? You might not be a human user. Not sure yet. We put you in the penalty box. So the penalty box is an area where we kind of delay the transaction, right? You're putting in a penalty box, you can't do anything for a couple of seconds. And if you're a bot, it's going to break. The bots will break if you place them in the penalty box because they're scripted and they're not expecting to go through a delay of 6 seconds or 7 seconds or stuff like that. To a human, Well, unless you're impatient like me, we'll probably wait out those few
Right,
seconds and carry on. But the important thing is to the user, I don't even know that I'm in the penalty box,
right,
right?
right, right.
But to the bot, they know
The
and
bot
they will
knows, yeah.
break. And that's going to stop the majority of those bot attacks or those, malicious bot activity and let the human or the legit human consumers through. So this is the kind of things we're thinking about in terms of both improving the user experience, making frictionless, but applying security at the back end at the same time. So just something to think about.
I'll never look at the internet the same way again, ever. And it reminds me when I first started working at Morgan Stanley in New York. This was a long time ago. Um, I didn't have a lot of money, and after work or sometimes on the weekends, I would just like walk up and down Fifth Avenue or Madison Avenue, and there are tons of little shops there. You'll see where I'm going in a second. And Harry Winston, which was a jewelry shop that's very, very expensive, had a guy standing outside, and the door to get in was locked. And I didn't have a lot of money, but people that did have a lot of money would want to go in and shop there. And I always thought to myself, this is like the CAPTCHA. It's like such a bad retail experience because it feels like, I guess it makes it feel exclusive if it's offline, but it still feels like I just want to walk in and look around kind of thing. And if an online experience is like that, it can't be great. One more industry, and then I'll let you go. What about the finance industry, right? This is where all the money's concentrated. This is where every transaction is potentially dangerous because all it is moving money around. And I know from my trading experience that somewhere between $5 trillion and $6 trillion a day moves in the FX markets alone. And all of it's electronic, or almost all of it, right? So what are some of the biggest issues here, and how are they addressing them?
So first of all, just to let you know, finance is still, well, currently and still the number one target for web application and API attacks across the world,
Has
based
to
on
be,
what we're
right?
seeing. Yeah,
Yeah, it has to be.
and it's not slowed down. It's increasing on the rate like 60% every single year. It just gets more and more and more. And that is just, apart from being concerning, is also showing that, with all the investments into security and compliance by the banks, because they just have to, the attacks are not slowing down. You're not going to get an attacker going, oh, it's too hard to break into a bank. I'm going to go somewhere
Right,
else.
right, right,
No,
right.
because I can't remember who said it, but back then there was an interview going on in terms of like a bank robber. Why do you rob banks?
I was just
Because
thinking the same thing. That's where the
that's where the
money
money
is.
is, right?
Right,
So
that's where the money is. What are you talking about? Yeah.
no one is going to rethink again. If I'm out for profit, I'll go after banks. It's really that simple. It's not rocket science, and therefore the attacks have not slowed down. And with regards to the stuff that we're seeing today is banks have gotten a lot more sophisticated because again they have to, right, digitally transforming themselves on a daily basis, harnessing blockchain, using APIs and AIs to get that competitive edge. They're doing everything that they need to do or that can be done, right, with technology, and that in turn expands the attack surface, introduces additional inherent risks into the organization, and not a lot are fully prepared to handle those, right? Let's take APIs, for example. APIs in banks are core critical, right? Because you've got open banking where you share data with other banks across the world. You've got APIs that are facilitating transactions with your ecosystem, your business partners, and you've got APIs that are powered by your AI LLM model that's connecting with third-party agents to get stuff done. APIs are everywhere in a bank. And because of that reason, the level of attacks we've seen is through the roof, like what you initially mentioned. And I'll give you a very interesting part on, it's not so much of APIs getting attacked, they are, but I want to divert your attention into the growing risk of APIs or financial APIs being abused. So there was a bank that I worked with previously, they're not really getting attacked, right? They were seeing some funny things on the APIs that they're getting, intermittent spikes of traffic. And this API's main objective is really for the merchants to do a query on, is this credit card number still valid? I don't need to go, give you my CVV. I don't need to give you anything else. Just the credit card number will suffice. And the bank, because it is their credit card, will return a response, yes, still valid, no, invalid, back to the merchant. And what they're saying is some funny things going on because, this is a pretty static, simple API. It shouldn't have this kind of traffic patterns and stuff like that. So we went in, we plugged in our API security and did a quick audit, and we realized that, hey, your API is being abused by bad guys, right? I can't say that criminals at this point, but bad guys that they are basically using the APIs to do a quick validation on tens of thousands of credit card numbers that they have stolen or through phishing attacks, and just validating which is still working. So they can zoom in their efforts to commit fraud on these credit card numbers that are still valid. So it's not exactly an attack per se on that API, but it's being used as an accessory to commit fraud. And that has huge repercussions to the bank, because the regulators are going to come in and say, why do you not have visibility that this is going on? Stuff like that. But this was a very interesting discovery that API abusers are growing in financial institutions on top of the huge amount of attacks we've seen so far.
That is so interesting. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you should be talking about way more, because, like you said, people are thinking about attacks in one way, and yet what these guys are doing, or these bad guys are doing, is a completely different abuse of that API. Getting the validation for a credit card for fraud that they've stolen, the numbers that they've stolen, so then they can go out and commit transactions all over the place and just take this money and do other things. Okay, Reuben, I'm going to let you go. Reuben Coe, Director of Security Technology and Strategy at Akamai Technologies. This was awesome, and like I said before, I will never look at the internet the same way again. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.